Okay, it's working. All right, so welcome everyone. I am Mary Murphy. I'm the Newtown Sped PTA president, and we also have other members of our board with us here. So I see the tile for Kim DiDomizio.
Hi.
Hello, Vice President. And Amy Friley. Come on down. Okay, Amy is our secretary. And so I wanted just to briefly introduce that we are all on the call. And so I wanted to start with just some kind of ground rules for how we go through our webinars. And we are new to webinars, so we're describing this for the first time for people. So I want everyone to feel free. We want you to ask questions. Throughout the presentation, you can use the Q&A function. We just won't do the questions as we go, but we will, compile them, and then we'll be able to go through it at the end. And please just do not use the chat, because then it becomes anarchy. I can't quite tell, whether we answered this question and whether there's details that we missed. So if you use the Q&A feature in Google Meet, it is not intuitive. It is the icon that is up top that, for some reason, it's a triangle followed by a square and a circle. I don't know.
See it.
But you see it, right? Okay, so that's called activities. And in there, you can press the Q&A, and then you can submit a question at any point throughout the time. All right. Okay. And so we will do our best to answer all the questions. If we don't, for some reason, get to all of them, our speakers were kind enough to say that they would field those questions by email and compile answers and get back to you. We want to be mindful that this is an open forum that's being recorded, so we can't guarantee confidentiality. So you may not want to reveal private information. Any information that's provided in the webinar by myself, Mary Murphy, Carol Pakla, and or Janine Kelly, our speakers. It's not intended to be legal or therapeutic advice. And the information, content, and materials are for general information purposes. Okay, that makes sense? Okay. Yep. All right. So the first person I wanted to introduce of our two speakers is Janine Kelly. And Janine is going to share her experience with us. Wave, Janine. Okay. Mrs. Kelly is going to share her experience with us as a former attorney and a current SPED advocate. Who helps parents of children with special needs navigate the special education process with confidence and mutual respect in working with the school district. Together, the focus is on educating parents on all aspects of this IEP process, and she focuses on helping parents communicate effectively with their child's teachers, service providers, administrators, and really to work collaboratively with their school teams. And our second speaker is Carol Pakla, and I always feel like I'm saying your last name wrong. Am I mutilating?
It's actually Pakala.
Oh, okay. You are saying it wrong. I apologize.
That's all right.
So Carol is going to be sharing her expertise with us in the development and implementation of IEPs and SPED programs, which comes from her over 15 years experience as a SPED administrator in a local Connecticut school district, more than one district, public and private, and on her extensive experience as a SPED advocate and a teacher and an administrator, many different sides of the table of representative and IEP table, right? If we were at a PPT, she would represent many different spots. And so she will focus on how the Connecticut SPED regulations are interpreted, how that affects writing IEPs and 504s that are evidence-based, research-based, and happen to promote the opportunity to work together as a team with the school district. So they are both members of the Collaborative Advocacy Associates. What is the city that you're based in?
Westport.
Westport, okay, in Westport. And so I wanted to turn it over to them And also, just explain that at the end, we are going to so we're doing the presentation, then we're going to have the Q&A, and then you're welcome to stay on, especially because there are new members that, I would love to, have us be able to meet. And so that's the order in which we plan to do things. Okay. All right. So I will be monitoring the chat, the Q&A. And so no problem if anything comes up, that's how you can reach me. If there's any private messages you need, things you want me to clarify, you can throw that in the chat. That would just go to me to look at. It's public, but you can use that to communicate with me live if there's something going on you need to communicate to me. All right. We are good to go? All right. Let's launch this puppy.
Thank you, Mary, for that introduction. I am Janine Kelly, and I grew up in Newtown. So when Mary asked me to do this presentation, I was very happy to do so. So, well, hello, everyone. And I know Newtown really well. I'm sure there are others of you from other towns on the call as well, but I'm happy to help out Newtown whenever I can. So I'm going to start my PowerPoint now. Okay, everybody can see that, hopefully?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so as Mary indicated, I am a licensed attorney, but my role as an advocate for families is a little bit different. I support families through the PPT process. I do not represent families in the legal process that may result from it. I'm also a parent of a student with special needs, so I understand the journey on a very personal level. And boy, the special education journey over the past 8 months with COVID has been very complicated and scary for us as parents. And it's been complicated frankly, for administrators and teachers and advocates and attorneys as well. Education has fundamentally changed. School districts have had to reinvent themselves and find new ways to engage students learning from home, and also to implement IEPs remotely. And while our students have been struggling to adapt to this, many of us as parents have taken on the additional role of teacher and service provider. And then to complicate matters even more, the IEP process was not built for a pandemic. IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, does not include provisions for how schools should operate or provide services to our students when the world shuts down. Federal and state guidance has been trickling down about what the districts and parents can be doing, but this is just guidance, and it does not hold the force of law, and therefore it can be confusing to all of us. So at the end of the day, we as parents are left to wonder, are our students learning and making progress? And how can we help to make sure that their needs are being met? So that's kind of the gist of where we're going with this today. Hopefully Carol and I will provide you with helpful tips that will guide you through this very complicated and very uncertain process right now. So here's just the 4 areas that we'll cover. And I'll start, I'm starting very basic because I don't know where people are in their journey, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the IEP versus the implementation plan. It's very important during COVID especially that parents be able to read and understand what's in your child's IEP. As you know, the IEP dictates what supports and services your child needs in order to learn. And during COVID, it remains in full force and effect. So let's just go over the basics of the IEP. So the IEP is a legal document that's established by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, as it's often referred to. It's a written legal education plan. It's basically a contract, and it's formed by the PPT team, including you as parents, and it's based on testing and assessments and data. It's actually a roadmap for a student's education, which identifies the student's strengths and needs, and it also outlines the specialized instruction, supports, and services that are necessary for the child to learn. So I'm going to flip back and forth between these 2 slides right now. The IEP cannot be changed except by agreement of the parent and team, which is called an amendment, or at a PPT based on discussion and appropriate data. And during COVID, the IEP is written as if school is in session with students in person. So as if COVID doesn't exist, that's how the IEP is written. And then during COVID, the Connecticut Department of Special Education has indicated that the school's IEP obligations have not changed. So that's a really important thing to remember. And again, there are no waivers of IDEA during COVID. So essentially what that means is that the IEP obligations remain the same during COVID instruction. And then during COVID, annual PPTs, triennial evaluations, and PPTs must continue, although there has been some flexibility with certain timelines. So for example, testing, there was some flexibility around the testing timeline just because schools were closed and we weren't able to do testing virtually. So there was a little bit of flexibility there. But the important thing to remember with the IEP is that you really need to know what's in it. You really need to know how to learn. You need to know how to basically learn how to use it and understand what is written in the IEP. Very important. So, so back to the implementation plan. You may have heard this term recently. I don't know if Newtown has begun to use the implementation plan yet, but in the past few months, Connecticut has issued guidelines on special education during COVID, and they've recommended that districts draft implementation plans in situations where a student's IEP can't be implemented as written due to COVID restraints. So between March and June, we all remember what was happening. Schools basically had to put together an online learning platform overnight that could be accessible to all students, including those with learning needs. And schools struggled with how to provide IEP services through an online platform. It was very difficult. Early guidance from the state at the time suggested that schools were required to implement IEPs to the greatest extent possible, which has caused a great deal of confusion. But now with this new guidance, if a school is unable to implement the IEP as written during either hybrid or in-person or fully online learning, the school should draft an implementation plan to go along with the IEP. So let's talk about the implementation plan now. It's a little bit of a mouthful. So the implementation plan is also a written document, but it's been established by the Connecticut Department of Special Education through guidance. So it's not through the law. And so it's just guidance, and then it's not mandatory, it's not required. And it's been established as a tool to use during COVID. And it really, it flows from the IEP. So the Connecticut recommends an implementation plan when a district can't implement the IEP as written, whether the district is full-time in school, in a hybrid mode, or fully remote. And it's important to remember that the IEP does not replace, that the implementation plan does not replace the IEP. It simply describes how the IEP will be implemented differently during in-person, hybrid, or fully remote learning. So I'm going to advance back to the next slide just for a moment. The implementation plan should not reduce the services that are specified in the IEP, and that's another important thing to remember. It must be designed by the team and parents as equal partners, and it does not require a PPT to form an implementation plan. You can do it at a team meeting. It can be changed anytime if the parents and the team agree. And again, the important thing to know with the implementation plan is that it flows from the IEP. So you have to really understand what's in your IEP, and it's only being implemented. It's only implementing services in a different way. It's not changing services. It's not reducing services. So I'll give you an example of what of a situation that might require an implementation plan. So Sally receives speech and language. Her IEP designates that she receives speech and language in a small group pullout 5 times a week. Now, because of COVID restrictions and hybrid learning, this can't be done on days that she's learning remotely. So the school team could draft an implementation plan that may say something like this. The school is in hybrid learning. So during school, when Sally is in school, she will receive speech and language in a small group pullout 5 times per week. Then when Sally is home on remote days, she will receive one-to-one speech therapy virtually. So that's basically a situation that might require an implementation plan. Again, the key takeaways: know what is in your child's IEP. If you don't understand how to read it, many parents don't understand how to read it. It's a very complicated document. And if you don't understand how to read it or what's in there, you can ask one of your team members to help you go through it. They'd be more than happy to do that. Or you can ask someone at Newtown Sped PTA. They all can help you read through your IEP and understand what's in there. Or I'm also the co-president of Wilton SpedNet. And later on, I will provide you with the link to that. You can ask someone from Wilton SpedNet to help you read through your IEP and understand it. Wilton SpedNet is a nonprofit organization that helps educate parents on the PPT process. So, and then another important thing to remember is that the implementation plan should not reduce the services in the IEP. It simply outlines how the IEP will be implemented in a different way due to COVID. So now, sometimes parents and teams may disagree on what the student needs and what should be in the IEP or the implementation plan, and that happens. There is a process for resolving disagreements, and that process is effectively the same whether we're talking about an IEP or an implementation plan. So we can go through this slide really quickly. So with the IEP, disagreements about the IEP can be resolved in a number of different ways. So you can talk about the disagreements, work through them at the PPT, which is always a good place to do that. If for some reason at the PPT you can't resolve your disagreement, then you just want to make sure that it's documented in the IEP during the PPT, and that would be on pages 2 and 3. If you can't ultimately resolve your disagreement and you want to pursue it further, there is what we call due process. This is a legal process, and mediation, which is available to parents who want to take their disagreement a step further. That subject, I'm going to use my pointer. So this process right here could be a whole nother webinar, but I just want to throw that out there so that everybody understands that there is a legal process that is there in place for parents if for some reason they can't resolve disagreements at a PPT. Okay, so then with the implementation plan, again, there's many different ways to resolve disagreements about it. It can be through discussion at a team meeting. Remember, the implementation plan can be designed at a team meeting. It doesn't need a PPT. If you can't resolve disagreements at a team meeting about the implementation plan, then you can ask for a follow-up PPT, and you can continue the discussion. And if at the end of that PPT you still can't agree on what the implementation plan says, then make sure you get it documented on the IEP on pages 2 and 3, and you can also pursue the due process. So the important thing to remember is always make your concerns and your disagreements known at a meeting. Don't be shy, talk through it respectfully. And if for whatever reason you're not able to resolve the disagreement, make sure that the disagreement is outlined in writing and is also documented in the IEP. So the next slide really just provides you guys with different links that can be really helpful to inform you about things I just mentioned. So SpedNet Wilton, the founders, Noreen O'Mahony and Eve Kessler, have put together many years ago a guidebook. It's called Bringing Knowledge to the Table. And if you click on that link, it will bring you to the SpedNet guide, and you can actually download that guidebook for free. And it outlines the entire PPT process from start to finish in very simple language. And it's a nice little book that you can carry with you or put next to you on your nightstand and read it at your leisure, but it really helps explain a very complicated process. And then here's some state guidance just on PPTs and IEPs during COVID. But what I really wanted to kind of click on right now for you is the implementation plan so that you can take a look at what the form is that's suggested, just so you have a visual of it. It looks a little bit different than the IEP. Are you guys able to see this?
No, we only can see the link.
Oh, you can't see the document?
Yeah.
Okay, so so if you can't see the document, then at your leisure, just click on the second link that I have here, and that will come right up to the guidance that's provided by the state of Connecticut, and it'll also show you at the end of that guidance what the implementation plan looks like. I'm sorry, I thought I'd be able to pull it up, but I guess I can't. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So the second thing I'm going to talk about today is the role of parents and teams during COVID and the importance of communication between parents and teams and data collection. So during COVID, as we discussed earlier, the roles of teachers and parents has really blurred. Many of us have taken on the additional roles of teacher and service provider while our students are learning at home. I like to think of this period of COVID learning as a gift, because we as parents are now able to see in real time how our students are learning because they're home. It's an important thing to keep in mind also with the PPT process, because we now have even more information that we can share with the team on how our student is engaging and performing in school when they're learning remotely. Parents should be really keeping track of how their student is doing during remote learning in their regular and special education classes, and also in their related services. So I'm just going to switch now to the slide. So just to kind of frame up the role of parents and teams before COVID and now during COVID. So pre-COVID, parents are always equal partners with member of their school teams in developing the IEP and then throughout the year. And the students' learning and progress delivery, the students' learning and progress is delivered and assessed by team members at school. Now during COVID, parents are still equal partners with members of their school teams, but parents can now assess how their child is learning during remote instruction. And the student is also learning, and the education is being delivered and assessed in the home and also at school if you're in a hybrid environment by the parents and by the team. I'll move on to the next slide now. So again, pre-COVID, it's really the team members that are taking data on progress and sharing it with the parents throughout the year. But now during COVID, parents have the ability to take data on how the student is responding to instruction and share that with the team. The team members' ability to take data actually is limited when the student is at home. They're only really able to take data when they're either seeing the student virtually online, which can be difficult, or when they're seeing the student in person. And if you're in a hybrid mode, the student is only in school maybe 1 or 2 times a week, whereas they're home 3 times a week. So the parent's ability to take data is actually increased during COVID when the student is home. And the team members really are going to rely on the parents to monitor and in some cases deliver instruction if they're posting assignments. And also during related services, sometimes related service team members will post something that parents can be doing at home. It's really important if you are supporting your child at home, and many of us are, especially if the children are young, that you take data on their daily performance in school and you save that in a notebook, a journal, and provide that information to your team, especially at PPTs. Especially since now, we've had a really long run between March and now, with students really being home the bulk of 6 months out of the year. Now they're just back at school, and we have a lot of information on how they did beforehand that we can share with them. And I'll talk about that a little more in the next slide. But just important tips. In both cases, it's very important to have regular communication with your team members. It's really critical for a student's success. You should really email the team regularly, ask them for questions, ask them for support, especially if you're doing stuff at home with your child, and make sure they know what's working and what's not when the student is home, because they have no way of knowing unless you tell them. Okay, so I'm going to advance on to the next screen slide. So here are some useful links for you on data collection. Solange Forte, who's a BCBA up at Milestone School, did a presentation for SpedNet a few months ago where she talked about how to take pretty detailed data from a parent's perspective. And that's a really good, we've recorded all of our webinars, and that's a really good one to watch. If you click on the link, it'll bring you to our webinars, and then you just have to scroll down to Solange Forte. And she goes through the forms it can use and the format that you can use to take data on goals. I really like to recommend for parents anecdotal data. Just keep a journal, because that's the easiest way for you to record data and really kind of hone in on how your student is doing while they're learning virtually. And you can take notes on anything that you might notice, things that are working, things that are not working, maybe areas of frustration for your student. Another suggestion, and this you have to be careful with because you don't want to video record a student in class, but something that's helpful for parents of students who may not necessarily be able to access virtual learning is let's say your child is wandering around the room when they really should be sitting at the computer, paying attention to the lecture or paying attention to whatever activity is going on, and they're just wandering around the room because they don't have the attention. You can videotape that, and you can share that with your team as yet another tool to show them how your student is doing. And then a third suggestion is to save copies of the assignments that the student does at home that you may be helping them with, and jot down little notes along the side, anything that they might have difficulty with, anything that they need reinforcement on, or anything that's just not working. And you can also share those documents with your team. So now my last little bit of this presentation is about compensatory education. And I know that many parents want to know more about this topic and how they can approach it with the team. I have it as a footnote in this presentation because right now it's really not clear whether compensatory education is the right framework to address what our kids have lost in their education during COVID. It's a very complicated area. I mean, let's face it, we're living through a global pandemic, and schools and families have really, for the most part, been trying to do the best that we can. And it's difficult to know what hearing officers and courts will do with a comp ed claim during these times. Federal and state governments have issued guidance on it, but it's still unclear. So I just want to go through the basics and then really talk out the types of discussions that you can be having with your team instead of raising the compensatory issue word, the compensatory education word. So compensatory education is a remedy that's designed by the courts. It's not something that you're going to find in IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It is a remedy that is designed by the courts basically to compensate a student where a school district has failed to provide a free and appropriate education. It's intended, the remedy is really intended to put the student back where they should have been had the school not denied the student of a free and appropriate education. So where it's designed to put them back where they would be if they had their free and appropriate education as it was supposed to be. Again, there's a question as to whether or not compensatory education is the right framework to remedy, all that we feel we've lost between March and now with our students' education. So what you really can do, and I think the more important thing to focus on is, if you feel that your child has lost skills or really has not had the education that's specified in their IEP, request a PPT if one's not already scheduled. I know a lot of the districts are right now scheduling annuals that they might be behind on that really should have taken place when schools had shut down, but we were unable to do so. You may have one that's already scheduled for that reason for your annual review, but if not, schedule a PPT and to address concerns about COVID slippage. And at that PPT, you should really discuss with the team and assess the following. So where was the student and where were their skills before the schools closed in March? And where are they now? And the team should be able to present some data as to where they are now. You may have some data as to what was going on while they were home and learning. And ask the question, where should my student have been at this point if schools had not been in session? And then, if you find through the data and through discussion that there really has been a slippage of skills, then you want to raise the question with the team about how you can bring the student back to where they should be, how to make up for what was lost during COVID. Again, it's a very data-driven discussion, and it's really got to be an open conversation and, respectful, and just make sure that your concerns are addressed and that the team is also able to present data from where the student was before schools closed and then where the student is now. And then during this PPT, if you do ask for additional services because of what you believe is a COVID slip, make sure that you note your request in the IEP on page 3 and 4. And then again, if you're having difficulty and you really can't seem to come to a resolution with the team at a PPT, then I would suggest, since it is kind of a complicated area, that you reach out to someone who might be able to help you, like an advocate or an attorney. And then, so I have some handy links again, if you want to read a little bit more about COVID-19 related comp ed claims. there is some guidance in here. And there is also an article by attorney Andy Feinstein, which is right here. Let's not talk comp ed generally for COVID-19 closure. And that's kind of where he goes into the fact that it is a little bit of a complicated area right now. So that's all I have for you guys. I'm going to hand the baton over to my friend Carol Pacala. And Carol, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Janine. That was, it's interesting how you just keep on learning. Just listening to Janine, I keep on picking up a tip here and there, and thank you so much. To you about, and Janine's touched on many of the things that I will talk about, but it's really important, that, to give you some tips on, what do I do? I was working with a family just the other day, and the mother was watching me talking to her son and just working with him, and she said, I can't do what you just did. And I said, well, I'm a teacher. You're the parent. So, you do your thing. And, but definitely she said she picked up some tips for me. So I thought that was, so it really was, it is helpful to kind of, be there for your kid, but also remember that this is not homeschooling, and it's really referred to as really crisis teaching. So don't expect that you have to be, the perfect teacher. In many ways, you are your son or daughter's first teacher, but definitely, you're there to facilitate. But one of the things that's really important, especially, when kids come into the building, we always make sure that they're feeling safe and happy and make sure that they're all ready to go. And so that time to set up in the morning, and I know that sometimes the mornings are very hectic, but you really should take care of your child's needs. And Maslow, who really talks about that those hierarchy of needs, and making sure that there has been time to eat, there have been time to get some wiggles out, to exercise, to make sure that your son or daughter is ready to learn. And that's going to take a little time. So schools thrive on structure and bells, and home isn't like that. But it is really good to kind of be in the mood to do that, but not having to adhere to being there minute by minute. Because that's the one thing about during this time of COVID, you don't have to adhere to every minute, but definitely. And I think it's also really important for kids to have some brain breaks, and throughout a class. And I do see that I want to give a shout out to someone that I know who's a teacher. There are times during a period that you give the kids a break, a minute or two, go get a glass of water, and that. So that's really important too. It's also very important, and I know that finding desks are very hard in this country now, because everyone's had to go and find desks and places to learn. Having that right environment, it shouldn't be your child's bed. My grandson thought that's how he was going to learn, and he was mistaken on that part. But definitely making sure that you have the right lighting in the seating, even some flexible seating, because sitting at a chair all the time, but certainly a beanbag, a place to have a little nook to read. Those are really important, and also to make sure that your technology is up to snuff. And I know that some districts have gone out and helped parents with grants to get, internet access, and making sure technology is there. I can only imagine how much districts have spent on making sure that kids have access to Chromebooks or whatever they need, and that's really important. And certainly away from distractions. And look, home is home. Making that into the schoolroom is hard. and phones ring and doorbells ring. Maybe not so much during COVID, but definitely we want to make sure that the TV is muted or off, and that ready to learn is right there. Certainly in a school, you'll see that, having daily routines and checklists and visual schedules is also really an important feature to have. Kids, they know what to expect, and it makes it easy. Definitely, though, there should be some flexibility. If you see that your son or daughter maybe needs a little break, it's all right. It's all right to change things up again. You just really have to go with the flow some days. You really want to try to, cover everything. That's the expectation, but, sometimes it can wait. It can wait for another time of the day. Also, when you have more than one child, how do you go back and forth? But so you have to make sure that if you have a quiet time or reading time with one of your children, the other one you can actually sit and work with. So you really have to be an orchestra leader in many ways, even a little flight controller, and so definitely you have to kind of know what's happening with everybody. And I can only imagine what it's like with 4 kids. That's very hard for everyone. But definitely, I think one of the things that's really important is communicating with teachers. And Janine's touched on it, but definitely, you're in this together. It is a village approach. It's not just you out there being, I'm out here in the wilderness and I'm not sure how to do this. But it really is, that squeaky wheel gets the oil, and it's really important that that you have that close collaboration. And in fact, as I research what the literature is saying, that is probably the major principle of making sure that you're communicating with the school, that the teacher knows what's going on, and don't be afraid to say it's not working, because you do have a lot of people with a lot of expertise that could help you through this, especially if the assignment is too tough or you didn't really understand it. Sometimes teachers they put something out there, the kids might know it, you might not know it, but asking questions and making sure that you know what is the end result, what is that my child has to produce, is really important. Another thing is that and we're just going to keep on highlighting this, but really understanding that IEP, what is that reading goal? What should that expectation be? My son has a reading fluency goal. What does that really mean? How can I work on reading fluency? Is there a just right book for him? Can you give me a list of just right books? So those are really important. Understanding, even the nuances. What does page 8? And page 8 is the page in the IEP that talks about modifications and accommodations. And what does that mean in the time of COVID? So, sometimes page 8s are just chock full of stuff: instructional strategies, behavioral interventions, other things that need to be done. So it's really important that you have a definition of what they are, and asking those questions is really important. It's also, we also have state standards. Kids with IEPs are not, they still have to apply those same standards to them. And so if you don't understand what is the expectations of this grade, what is it by the end of the year this student will be able to do, and understanding those outcomes, and then really drilling down to what those skills are. And I know that schools are really trying very hard to align IEPs with state standards. But an IEP is based on the student's needs, and even if the student is maybe not at grade level, there is a standard that they could still work towards, because the standards are really done more in a spiral effect, as they, it's, certainly predicting is a state standard in language arts, but what it looks like in kindergarten, what it looks like in 12th grade is different. But definitely that's what we work on that with kids. We look on textual evidence. And so what does a fifth grader supposed to know about textual evidence? And does having to do with writing. So these are all the fun things. And you can find the state standards at the state website. They do not have state standards for emotional learning, just so you know that. So it's not for everything, but they do have state standards for everything else. And we call them in Connecticut core standards. Other states call it the Common Core. Connecticut's always a little different what we call things. In fact, we're the only state that calls them planning and placement team meetings, PPTs. Everybody else calls them IEPs. So we're a little unique, but definitely when you find a roadblock, put up the smoke signals, help me, help me, help me, because it really is important. And also just really make sure that it's not about being perfect. It's about really making sure that we're focusing on some growth. And, sometimes practice is really important especially when a student learns a new skill. It's not going to happen. That aha moment isn't going to happen. That the light bulb isn't always going to go on immediately. And that's why, we think of having more practice. Oftentimes kids who have IEPs need even more practice, need things broken down even more. A lot of times kids with IEPs, they can't always just listen to something. They have to see it, touch it, feel it. And so, making sure that you are adding videos to it or asking teachers for things and not just talking and showing, but definitely doing things. So using manipulatives at math time, it's fine to do that. Even for kids who are, in late middle school, they especially kids who have IEPs, it's really important. And so that's why looking at the student's IEP and making sure that page 8 is really all that stuff that they need in assisting to learn is there. Okay. So use that IEP as your guide, and certainly it's really good as you start the day to review the day with your son or daughter. This is what we're going to do first, second. That first, then is really a good thing. This is really interesting. As I was researching it, having those morning meetings is really important. So that's really a good start off. And I know many schools during remote or hybrid learning, usually start out with a morning meeting. And it's really amazing that it said in this one article I was reading that having morning meetings actually raise learning about 20%. So the students have an idea of this is where we're going. Everyone needs a roadmap. And I think that's really important, during that morning meeting. You can even have your own morning meeting. This is what we're going to accomplish today. And if you had something special something to do at the end of the day, that would even make it even great. It's always great to start off with a fun activity. In school, we call sometimes them warm-ups, and sometimes we even, if we have the student do a little work or review, we call them do-nows. But definitely doing things that are of high interest, a word search, a puzzle piece, or having mazes. It gets their motor running. I have found lots of wonderful little short videos, animated videos that really are wonderful little things. They're motivational, they're fun. You can work on sequencing, but definitely, YouTube is a wonderful tool. So I would suggest using that. It's really sometimes getting started, and if you find that your son or daughter is just really having a hard time sometimes that first step might be just too hard. And so you might need to break it down. It's okay to help them out. It's okay to help them start a sentence. It's okay to take something and break it down even more. When we do that, and especially oftentimes teachers will do things, one step at a time. And maybe it's not working for all kids with IEPs, so we call it super chunking, where we take what the teacher has done and even chunk it down a little bit more. Definitely that check-in. Certainly making sure that the student your student has some time to show some independent work, not hovering so much, but definitely letting them, do a little work on their own while you kind of take a step back. But definitely using that first then approach. First, we're going to do this, then we're going to do that, because that's certainly a way of sometimes even negotiating with students. It's a great thing to do. But definitely, you don't have to have everything done every day. But definitely, you want to try to hit the high points. You want to always make sure that you have steps. First, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And it's great, I don't know, but having a whiteboard, having several whiteboards around is really important, because, we are all, we talk a lot, and kids who have IEPs, they need often a visual support. Too many words, they'll start sounding like the old Charlie Brown, wah, wah, wah. And so we really do want to make sure that we, that we use visuals to support any learning. As I said before, you could certainly rotate more than, your children around while one's reading. One could be doing math, definitely moving around, that they could have a brain break, but definitely trying to even generalize some, math skills, go out and, put the dishes away, or do something counting in that regard, or, so you can make math a little more fun. Definitely one of the things about time management, sometimes timers, or some of these visual timers, are also really a good little tool to use. Kids know that, in 10 minutes, and it's really sometimes hard for kids to even understand what 10 minutes are. But if you had a visual timer that actually, it counts down, the red disappears, and then it's time. But these are all really good little tools to have. And you can find these visual timers. You can even get them on watches. You can have them on the computer. So they're really great. It's also good to give your child some choices. Do you want to do this first, or do you want to do that first? And sometimes sometimes students will pick something that they prefer to do first. Sometimes you can't negotiate that, but if there's any opportunities to do some choices of where they're going to sit to do this work, or what work they want to do first, that would be really great. And then again, just to use as many online resources. There's so much out there. And a lot of things now are free. During the COVID time, a lot of companies who had to pay to subscribe now have open, and you're allowed to use the resources there. So those are some ideas. What do we know about kids who have, and this is certainly a very broad category, because they come in all shapes and sizes, and they go from pre-kindergarten up until 12th grade, and we have all sorts of abilities and challenges. But definitely, I do believe that kids crave structure, especially kids who have IEPs. They like knowing what's going to come first, second, or third. But making sure that that they have unique learning needs, and that you know that they don't quite learn this way. So it's really always, I always like to think of, and I've told this to many students over the years, that we all walk around with an imaginary tool belt, and that you have one around you. And what my job is to make sure that you know what tools are there, and what tool you can pull out if you need to use it to do a certain job. And so it's really the kind of training and giving kids those strategies and tools, so that when they know that they have to, for instance, write something, they can go to their read and write on their Google extension, and they know that they can use that word prediction. Or if they have to read something on a website, they can pull down how the read, so they know that, and that's their go-to little tool. But one thing that's really crucial, and I think that we all we strive for this, but giving kids positive feedback, as especially genuine feedback is so important. Giving them encouragement. I really like the way you did this, especially when they do something kind of shaping them to do something. You're just about finished. Oh, one more sentence. It's also really good when we talk about writing paragraphs, and kids with IEPs often have a really hard time filling up that big blank piece of paper or even on their computer, but it's always really good. Why don't we write 6 sentences? Why don't we write 5 sentences? I'll show you how to write the first one. So giving them models and certainly recipes is really, really great to use. Definitely, Janine touched on this as well, is to take the data. The anecdotal notes, I think, really work. This is what the class was supposed to do. This is what my son or daughter did. And even kind of the thorns and the roses, things that happened really, really great and things that didn't. And I think that that's really, that's the barometer of how much do I need help with. And you also have to know about how independent is my child. And there are some students who are in special ed who really, that independence, we have created many students who are very prompt dependent. And even they look at you, just even their faces to see if they've gotten the right answer. And we really wanted to try, even the little guys, trying to get them to work for a couple of minutes by themselves. That's when you can, give them something to do, step back. You can certainly see if they can do it. If they can't, then of course you're going to have to help them. But, we really want, those students who really are moving on to the upper grades, from middle school to high school, to be as independent as possible. So it's really important, finish these 3 problems and check in with me, those kinds of things, and step away. You don't have to be tethered to their learning. They've got to kind of grow a little bit. So that's some of the tips, but in a nutshell, so having that consistent learning environment, and using visuals. And I would say using even more visuals than you think, because I think that kids need that. You might have a resource book where they have the things that they need right there. Definitely create that structure with time for a break, time to learn, time to relax. Definitely using checklists, breaking down tasks into really manageable pieces, one at a time. And break up the day, with some exercise, with some videos, with some games. You can even, practice your addition or subtraction, multiplication facts by just even throwing a Nerf ball back and forth. Those kinds of things keep the flow going. In fact, oftentimes I sometimes see teachers doing that in their classroom just as a warm-up activity. But get off to a good start. I think that's really important. And, one day, especially Monday mornings, on a rainy Monday morning, it might be a little harder to get started, but, that's all right. Give them the time. It's better to start late on a good send off than to, start having chaos in the beginning of the day. And when we have snow days at school, it's a hard start some days. Kids drifting in, the snow is a distraction. So sometimes it takes a while for, even when the kids do get to school on a delayed opening, to kind of get down to the brass tacks of it all. And before a holiday, you can imagine what it's like at a school. So those are some days when you just really have to, put an extra Teflon on and go with it. But, the same things happens at home on any given day. It could be just a really more disruptive day just because of things. And definitely having social and activity reinforcers. Definitely, we want to try to get away from edibles as primary reinforcement, but definitely looking forward to doing something with an activity is always a great way to end the day or end the week, or spending a half a day doing something, going to the pumpkin patch, or, something seasonal. That's really always a great thing to do. But there's sometimes it just doesn't work. And there are some students, especially those students who have significant disabilities, where it's just, getting them to sit and focus. And I think that the important thing here is just to try it. If it lasts a minute or two, at least you've tried. And I do believe then, and it's no really different at school when we have a student who has some significant disabilities and has a really hard time engaging and just attention wise. Some days can be really good and some days aren't. But we don't just say, oh, you can go sit in the corner. We really do try. So it's really bringing that arsenal of everything that you have. But this is where the expertise of the school teacher, of the teacher, of the classroom teacher, or the BCBA. What is it what can I do? Following a behavior plan, having a quick meeting of what can I do? If he does this, then I should do that. So it definitely is that you're not out there kind of alone. But there have been times when, and I've been in meetings where based on the needs of the student, that the school has allowed the student to come in more often. But really definitely have that conversation. Don't do it alone. But it is tough, but you don't have to accept this is how it's going to be, because there are other people out there who want to help. And, and if you, as I said before, the squeaky wheel gets that oil. Okay.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself fast enough. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Carol and Janine. It's interesting, like I had seen the presentation, but not had the voice behind it to see the guidance of how the conversation would unfold. And so I think there's this interesting blend of like the brass tacks of like, what is the IEP? Like what kind of services can we be expecting in this very strange time? And then how do we support? I kept thinking with Carol that you were really touching on supporting their executive functioning. Mm-hmm. and really all of our kids, just by nature of being kids, struggle with that to begin with. And during this time, we're seeing it live in action when they're home. And even if they're not in hybrid days, they're always struggling with that in this very strange climate. It's exacerbated, definitely. And we have a front row seat. So we're really, really seeing that. So I think those are really some good practical things. And I was thinking about how I wonder if people realize that all the way through 12th grade, those are the recommendations to still use. It becomes more, sophisticated than the visual timer. It just becomes an app. Like you meet the needs of like the teen and the adolescent, but it's always those same strategies. And so anyway, it really resonated with me, everything that you both were saying, and I really, really appreciate that. So I wanted to go through the Q&A. So the first question, I couldn't reply just to let you know the answer to these, but just to let you know, the first question was, will we have access to these slides? Yes, they will be emailed to me, and then they will be put, this is our first archive. So first of all, we're getting a YouTube channel. Woohoo. We're like high tech now. So our webmaster, I didn't even get to explain to the board yet, but our webmaster gave us a YouTube channel. So we are going to have that. But also we have a website for the Newtown Sped PTA. So it's newtownspedpta.com. And we also have the Newtown Sped PTA on Facebook. And so we would want you to follow and be able to view files and videos that are uploaded and see at the website as well. So that's where everything will be. And Janine, I have a quick question. Sure. Should I stop the recording just in case there's any personal nature to the questions? I don't see highly personal stuff, but what do you typically do?
So what we do is we stop the recording just so that people they feel a little more comfortable I mean, I still would recommend that nobody provide any information that might be revealing that you don't want out there in the public domain. But I would definitely stop the recording. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to do that, but just in case there's people that watch this recording later, just want to say, make sure that you check Facebook, where it's Newtown Sped PTA, and go to the website, newtownspedpta.com. And we are the same for Gmail. You can also email us at newtownspedpta@gmail.com if you have any questions about how to reach us or follow-ups to today.